Between the mid-1620s and the early 1640s, Jeffery Hudson, a dwarf from Rutlandshire, became a prominent feature at the Stuart court of King Charles I and Queen Henrietta Maria. Famed for his small stature, he eventually acquired a knighthood before fleeing to France with the Queen as a result of the Civil War in England in the 1640s. He was subsequently captured by Barbary pirates and spent a quarter of a century as a slave in North Africa, before returning to England in the late 1660s. This is his highly intriguing story. Jeffery Hudson was born at Oakham in Rutlandshire, in England on the 14th of June 1619. He was the son of John Hudson, a butcher who was employed at the time as part of the very wide patronage network of George Villiers, 1st Duke of Buckingham. Villiers had risen in the mid-1610s to become the court favourite of the English king, James I, a position Buckingham would continue to occupy until James's death in 1625, and for several years thereafter, during the reign of his son, Charles I. The ties of the Hudson family to the Buckingham affinity would have considerable consequences for Geoffrey's entire life. Although both of Geoffrey's parents were normal-sized, Geoffrey developed as a dwarf. This was apparent from a very early point in his life, and by the age of 8, he stood barely at 1.5 feet tall. It was at this time he was presented by his father to the Duke of Buckingham and his wife, the Duchess Catherine. It was the latter who then subsequently introduced Geoffrey to the relatively newly crowned King and Queen of England, Charles I, and his wife Henrietta Maria, the daughter of the former King of France, Henry IV. It surely strikes our age as highly inappropriate, but Geoffrey was presented to the royal couple, most likely early in 1627, by having him dressed in a suit of armour and emerge from a giant pie before the King and Queen to amuse or surprise them with his height. Whatever the retrospective morality of this, at the time, Charles and Henrietta were somewhat enchanted by Geoffrey and brought him to the Stuart court thereafter. This may have been to act as a replacement for another dwarf by the name of Richard Gibson, who had recently left the Stuart court. Hudson would spend most of the next 2 decades living at the royal court, and in particular, in the entourage of the Queen, often in the same orbit as a number of other curiosities at the court, the others being several other dwarves, a monkey called Pug, and the giant man from Wales by the name of William Evans. There are several portraits and court scenes from the time which feature Hudson as a result. For instance, a painting by the Dutch painter Daniel Michtens, produced around the year 1630, depicts Hudson in a wooded scene. The fact that he was the subject of a painting by one of the most prominent court painters of the day is indicative of Hudson's importance to the royal court at this time. However, surely the most famous depiction of Geoffrey is found in a portrait of Queen Henrietta Maria, painted in 1633 by the great Dutch painter Anthony van Dyck, in which Hudson and the monkey Pug are seen directly next to the Queen. Hudson, far from being an overt victim of his circumstances, is said to have been fully aware of his status at court and developed a proportionate haughtiness, it being said that Geoffrey was wanting nothing but humility. Furthermore, while at court he was given a variety of names. He was known widely as the Queen's Dwarf and Lord Minimus. Some even considered him one of the wonders of the age, because of his extreme but well-proportioned smallness. As he entered his teenage years, Hudson became a staple feature of life at the royal court. He is, for example, recorded at being involved in several court masques, or plays performed at the Stuart court in the late 1620s and early 1630s. This was not unusual in the early modern Europe, and a traveller to the Spanish court at Madrid, the French court at Paris, or the Austrian court at Vienna would have also witnessed dwarves there too. Yet, there are also signs of a more nuanced personality as well. Despite his dwarfism, Hudson took an interest in military affairs, and in 1637 was present at the siege of the town of Breda in the Low Countries at the height of the 30 Years' War in Europe. In 1636, he was conscious enough of his own mind to adopt the Roman Catholicism of his queen, a rare decision in a country which had become predominantly Protestant by the 17th century. Hudson had also acquired a minor celebrity status in the 1630s. This was owing to an incident in 1630, when he was just 10 or 11 years of age. At that time, Hudson had been sent as part of a government mission to Paris, in the course of which he was kidnapped by pirates sailing out of the northern French port of Dunkirk. News of his capture upset Henrietta Maria to such an extent that the Venetian ambassador reported to his superiors in Italy that the English court was more upset at Hudson's capture than if an entire fleet had been lost. This episode inspired a mock epic by the English playwright William Davenant in 1638, which he titled Jeffreidos, after Hudson. All, however, was not well in the wider politics of England during these years. Charles I was a highly autocratic ruler, with a desire to establish an absolutist monarchy, such as the one which had been developed in France in the early 17th century. Accordingly, from the late 1620s, he attempted to govern his realms through a small group of close followers, without having to recourse to the English Parliament. After the Parliament of 1628 was dissolved, he would not assemble another one for 12 years, a highly unusual and inflammatory move on the king's part. As a consequence of this oppressive rule, public unrest and displeasure with the Stuart monarchy was growing in the 1630s. By the end of the decade, Charles was facing a major rebellion in Scotland, where a coalition of interest groups, known as the Covenanters, invaded northern England. This eventually precipitated a major rebellion in Ireland in the autumn of 1641, and the following year, a civil war erupted in England itself, with a new parliament increasingly bent on opposing the king. Already before the English Civil War broke out in mid-1642, Queen Henrietta Maria and her court favourites had left England for The Hague in the Dutch Republic. This was for multiple reasons, including the Queen's safety, and also to remove the Queen from England. Well, her Roman Catholicism had become a lightning rod for criticism and discontent with Charles's regime. The Dutch Republic was also the richest nation in Europe in the mid-17th century, and Henrietta was sent to the Low Countries in 1642 in order to acquire large loans and financial subsidies to send to England, in order to support Charles and the royalist cause in the impending civil war. The importance of all of this for Jeffery Hudson was that he found himself leaving England for The Hague himself in the spring of 1642. He temporarily returned with the Queen to England in the months that followed, and was appointed by Henrietta as a captain of the horse in the royalist forces. It is possible that Hudson actually exercised some kind of limited command, albeit in the role of a bodyguard for the Queen. He was certainly with her in 1644, as the war effort for the royalists deteriorated sharply, and Henrietta was once again forced to flee from England, this time to her homeland in France. Charles remained in England, where after several years of further negotiations and conflict with the English Parliament, he was eventually executed in 1649. A Commonwealth, or Republic, would follow for 11 years, one largely dominated by the Protector, Oliver Cromwell, before the monarchy was restored in 1660, headed by Charles II, the son of the murdered king. It was during this last exile that Hudson found himself involved in a duel which would have disastrous consequences for him. In October 1644, perhaps out of frustration with the mocking he received from an English cohort in exile, Hudson challenged the brother of the captain of the Queen's personal guard, William Crofts, to a duel. Crofts showed up to the duel, treating it as a joke of sorts, and bearing a species of early modern water pistol. Hudson had the last laugh when he shot Crofts in the head with a real gun and killed him. But he was then charged with murder, a charge which the Queen managed to intervene in to avoid him having received the death penalty for. But nevertheless, Henrietta was forced to banish Geoffrey from France in order to allay the anger of the French authorities. It was while he was leaving France, in the aftermath of this incident, that Hudson was captured for the second time in his life by pirates. This time, a crew of buccaneers operating out of the Barbary coast in North Africa, the heartland of European and North African piracy in the mid-17th century. But this time, he was not as fortunate as he had been in 1630. On this latter occasion, Hudson was taken to North Africa, where he was sold as a slave, a position which he found himself in for the next 25 years of his life. We know almost nothing of what happened to Hudson during the quarter of a century he spent in North Africa, a hardly surprising lack of evidence for a person who spent this time in slavery. One curious development was that Hudson began to grow further during these years, particularly during the 1650s as he entered his 30s, and he would eventually reach a height of 3 foot and 9 inches. Jeffery eventually escaped this dreadful situation towards the end of the 1660s, following the intervention of George Villiers, the second Duke of Buckingham, and the son of the first Duke, and the Duchess who had introduced Hudson to Charles I and Henrietta Maria over 40 years earlier. A ransom was paid, and Hudson was back in England by 1669. Hudson spent the next several years back at his original home of Oakham in Rutlandshire, which happens to be the smallest county in England, leading to some having labelled him as the smallest man from the smallest county. During this time, he was interviewed by James Wright, an antiquarian and historian from Rutlandshire, who published a county history thereof in 1684, in which Hudson was noted. In 1679, Hudson returned to London, seemingly with the goal of either acquiring employment at the court of Charles II, or perhaps in the hopes of successfully petitioning for a pension in the light of his service to the current king's father and mother in the 1630s and 1640s. Yet, even in this, he again met with misfortune. In the late 1670s, a fictitious Roman Catholic plot had put London in a stir against adherents of Roman Catholicism. The fake plot centred on the actions of Titus Oates, an English priest who was allegedly implicated in a conspiracy to murder Charles II. Much to Hudson's misfortune, Oates was also from Rutlandshire, and Jeffery was now falsely suspected of some role in the plot on account of his own Roman Catholicism. Thus, shortly after his arrival in the capital, Hudson found himself under arrest and placed for a time in the Gatehouse prison in Westminster. Yet, there was some recompense at the end of his ordeals. When he was released from the Gatehouse in 1680, Hudson was granted a payment of £50 from Charles II in June 1680, a not inconsiderable sum at the time. This was followed by a further payment of £20 in April 1681, shortly before his death in 1682, at the age of about 62. Clearly, contemporaries were aware of Hudson's importance to the earlier court life of Stuart England, and some of his clothes were preserved. His waistcoat, pants and stockings can be seen on display today at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Sir Jeffery Hudson. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave me a like and a comment down below, and if you're new and subscribe, please make sure to have notifications turned on so you get all my videos as soon as they're uploaded. And if you have any suggestions, you can leave them in the comments, or if you send me an email or a message to my Instagram, which are below in the description, it's more likely that I will see it. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks!